The native people, of course, came before that, and among the native people, the Scarborough Bluffs had a reputation as a healing place and as a meeting place of peace. So the human history associated with the Scarborough Bluffs and the waters of Lake Ontario go right back to the beginning of Canada's establishment. There's some interesting dimensions too, as far as wildlife go. Some of those early writers, including Elizabeth Simcoe, and then after her, Ernest Thompson Seton, observed eagles along the bluff shoreline. That would be bald eagles and probably golden eagles too. The reason now why the bald eagle couldn't once again make its home along the bluff area. They have come back successfully in parts of Lake Erie, and they could do so here again along the north shore of Lake Ontario. We're looking towards an eastern part of the bluffs, and you may be able to see the flocks of double-crested cormorants skimming across the water. Also flocks of various gulls and other waterfowl in the inshore waters. And then we look back east to the east point where the bluffs pretty well peter out, and then we can see directly astern the Toronto Hydro wind anemometer. The other scientific dimension of the Scarborough Bluffs that makes them of national importance is that the exposed face contains what is probably the best record of the Pleistocene epoch anywhere in the world. That's the geological era that ended about 12,000 years ago. It records the advance retreats of successive glaciers, reveals the coming and going of the last ice age. It has records of life forms that inhabited this area of the earth 90,000 or more years ago. Geological features have been traced inland and across the present shore of Toronto, for instance in the Don Valley Brickworks, and that has helped to establish the timelines of geological significance over the past 90,000 years or so. So those are some of the arguments, some of the features that make the Scarborough Bluffs and the associated waters of Lake Ontario unique and worthy of national park status. But perhaps most of all is the demonstrations of support and affection that have come from the grassroots in opposition to the industrialization at the Scarborough Bluff and Lake Ontario environment. Here we are back in port again, June 17th, 2010, after our trip to the Toronto Hydro wind anemometer. I have a few documents here that I would like to share. As I mentioned, Nature Canada came out with a statement concerning the bird and bat kill statistics from the Wolf Island wind farm. And the article describing Nature Canada's response was published in the Globe and Mail, June 10th, 2010. There it is there. I also mentioned that Ontario Nature had come up with a position at their annual general meeting, May 29th, 2010. I'll just read part of the resolution here. 1. Calls upon the Government of Ontario to place a moratorium on wind farm development within 5 kilometers of areas of known significance to migrating birds. 2. Urges the government to protect these sites from wind farm development if studies determine that they have significant bird migration concentrations. And that was passed unanimously. There's the document there. Ontario Nature is probably the oldest and most respected environmental organization in Ontario, and ditto for Nature Canada as far as Canada goes nationally. Another document from Ontario Nature from their website, keeping the green in green energy, speak up for bats. And that came out June 9th, 2010. Basically, their concern is that bat populations should be studied and monitored before a wind farm is constructed, not afterwards and then trying to remediate any problems that come up after the fact. There's the document there. Another document I have here is from the Lake Erie Committee of the Great Lakes Fishery Commission. And they have a whole list of concerns with respect to offshore wind farm development in Lake Erie, as it would affect fisheries. This would also apply to any of the Great Lakes, including Lake Ontario. One of their more significant statements they make is, quote, "There is virtually no information documenting short-term or long-term impacts of offshore wind power development in any freshwater environment," unquote. And of course, Lake Ontario Waterkeeper, from the beginning of the wind farm, offshore wind farm issue, is keeping on top of developments and providing legal advice. So in the light of these documents and developments, in the early part of 2010, after, I might say, part 1 of this DVD was produced and distributed to those groups. It seems like other environmental groups should reconsider their dismissive attitudes towards criticism of offshore wind turbine farm developments. I've used some of the time in port here to do a bit of research on the extreme weather conditions that historically have developed in Lake Ontario, and also to think back on some of my own experiences over the years exploring along the north shore of Lake Ontario and sailing her waters. In my experience, it's not uncommon for Lake Ontario to be able to develop 4 to 5 meter waves when there's a strong east wind blowing in storm conditions. And these waves aren't like ocean swells. They're steep breaking seas, very powerful. In the wintertime, freezing spray is a hazard too. That's water that is airborne either through very high winds or breaking off the bow of a ship. And while it's in the air, it freezes upon contact with any surface. And looking back in history, there's been numerous extreme storms over the lake. Perhaps the one most recent in memory would have been Hurricane Hazel in 1954, which crossed over Lake Ontario and caused massive flooding in the Toronto area. Now, looking back somewhat farther into history, I located a document in a book called, it's a classic book called Waves and Beaches, and it was by Willard Bascombe, and the volume was published by Doubleday in 1980. And he cites this instance: a severe gale at Buffalo, New York in December 1899, which developed an 80-mile-per-hour west wind. There was a timber crib breakwater recently completed a few weeks before the storm. Tremendous seas broke over the breakwater to heights of 75 to 125 feet. 70 12 by 12 timbers and 900 feet of superstructure were smashed by the waves. So, when we think of those forces, I had to think back about that wind anemometer that we visited out on the lake. And to my mind, the platform there, with all the equipment and machinery on it, if you see that white cylinder in the middle of the frame, That is an emergency escape life raft. So presumably they have that there if the rig was hit with a large storm. Whoever was on there would be able to get away in a life raft, or if the boat couldn't get out there. The fact is, Lake Ontario can humble you very quickly. I have found that out myself. Could very easily be swept by seas, particularly during a easterly storm, winter storm. Freezing spray could coat the platform, weigh things down. So from what I could see on the platform, there's probably an abundance of things like diesel fuel, oils. There was an outhouse that appeared to be freestanding. And even the crane there potentially could be swept away by extreme storm force, seas and winds. I mentioned these examples of extreme weather, not to be overly alarmist, but to point out what would appear to be a pattern of inadequate or hasty planning surrounding the whole Great Lakes offshore wind turbine issue. And that is something to be concerned about. We're not talking small potatoes here, but our whole future approach to the Great Lakes, and in this case Lake Ontario in particular. We want to get it right from the beginning. I also used this time in port to do a bit of research as far as the fish and wildlife that depend on the offshore waters of Lake Ontario and specific habitats such as the Scarborough Bluffs. Basically what I've found is that there are a number of legal conventions which protect almost every species of wildlife that inhabits or depends on those areas. For instance, the Migratory Birds Convention between Canada and the United States protects all the migratory birds, including gulls and waterfowl, from interference. The Fish and Wildlife Act protects even the much maligned cormorant from harassment. A new legal act is the Endangered Species Act, which was updated in Ontario in 2007. There's 2 species listed under that act that are presently found in the Scarborough Bluff, Lake Ontario zone. One I've mentioned is the monarch butterfly. Is currently listed as a species of special concern. Now the monarch is also listed by the World Wildlife Fund in a different